About 7 years ago, I had a client who tried to rip me off for $15,000 in an experience that only got worse as the job continued. My client said all the right things, made all the right promises, and I fell for it, and I bet you would have done the same. But after years of trial and error, I think I've finally figured out a way to guarantee the dream client every time. But first, we need to understand the difference. Today, I'm going to show you both sides of the client experience as I tell the story of my worst client nightmare while showing you a build commissioned by the perfect client ever. Now, I will admit that two of the biggest red flags are somewhat embarrassing, especially because one of them happened at the very beginning. I mean, this all could have been avoided if I wasn't so naive and desperate, but I literally had no work on at this point. And based on all the promises, this massive fit out for a local restaurant was not only going to fix my financial struggles, but it was going to skyrocket my business. Apparently, it was going to be the biggest restaurant in town, with a big name photographer who's going to take photos, celebrities and influencers who are going to promote it, and I'll get to fit out all the other restaurants. But the one that really got me is he wanted me to design my dream cabinet. I drew up my designs, sent over the quote, and was met with an immediate yes. But he's waiting on some money to clear and can't pay the full 50% deposit yet. How about 30% and we'll pay you the rest in 2 weeks, he said. This is the first of many red flags. If the client can't afford the deposit, chances are they can't afford the full amount. But I trusted him, and I was too invested at this point after I'd spent so much time coming up with the designs. Plus, this job had an almost impossible deadline, so I had to start now. I believed the promises and stupidly said yes. Now, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, these current clients couldn't wait to pay their deposit to get the ball rolling on these two side tables that I'm making from walnut and brass. As always, the walnut has been supplied by Britain Timbers. I'll leave a link below to their website where you can get detailed information about different woods and building products. The design of these cabinets came from years of building two-door cabinets like sideboards and kitchen cupboards. Obviously, two doors create a centre gap, which is standard, but can be distracting to the eye if you're after a continuous flow across the cabinet. So, I wanted to create a two-door cabinet that has no visual gap, creating a large single front panel that still acts as two separate doors. I actually came up with this design many years ago. In fact, this is the first time I've ever built the same piece twice since starting my business. And because this piece isn't intended to be a one-off design for my clients, I'm actually going to do something that I always get asked about, but haven't ever done before. More on that shortly. Now, I mentioned two major red flags. I can almost hear your palms hitting your foreheads after I accepted the 30% deposit, but the next major red flag wouldn't actually happen until the day of installation. This was the exact moment I knew I was getting screwed over. It may not look like it at this point, but these side tables are incredibly detailed, and any discrepancies now will throw out everything later on, and I mean everything. In fact, this project is a perfect exercise for precision in woodworking, as the door measurements have to be dead on. You'll see later, but I'm dealing with 0.25mm increments. And even though the details of the doors are the focal point of this design, one of my other favourite features is actually this edge detail. Just adding a slight taper to the edge changes the entire look of the cabinets. This is a detail that I know the clients are going to love, who are actually the same clients from my last piece, so I already know that they appreciate attention to detail. And to be fair, my client from 7 years ago also had a great eye for detail. I think that's part of the reason why I got so excited. The designs at the time were some of my best yet, but clearly I'm turning a blind eye to the fact that the 30% deposit doesn't even cover material costs, so at this point I'm losing money. But I can still remember the joy I felt finally being able to sink my teeth into a project that was not only exciting, but it was something that was going to help excel my business. You see, I was being commissioned to fit out all of the woodwork in a new high-end restaurant, and this was my opportunity to leave my mark. The job was to build a couple of cabinets next to the bar, which were intended to be one of the focal points of the whole fit out, plus some of the coolest countertops I'd ever done. This place was going to have a massive grand opening on Christmas Eve where finally everyone was going to see the type of work I was capable of. Plus, I was going to get professional photos that I could put up on my website. This is before I knew how to take my own photos. There were so many promises, so much excitement. This was a job that was going to turn my business around, but I was struggling. Not just for lack of money, but I had a deadline that was seemingly impossible to accomplish. It was currently the end of October and opening night was Christmas Eve, but this is when I had to board a plane to Brazil for 3 weeks. Now, I can already hear people warming up their fingers to comment, "Nick, you shouldn't be going away when you have no money." And all I can say to that is, yeah, no shit. I'm someone who struggles with holidays even at the best of times. But this trip was booked and paid for well in advance at a time that I could actually afford it. Plus, it was for a friend's wedding, and how often do you get the opportunity to celebrate with 15 of your close friends in Brazil? Let's just say I was looking pretty closely at those menu prices. Now, even though these side tables don't need shop-made veneers, ordering solid wood and pre-made veneers separately means you run the risk of differences in grain and colour. So to keep it consistent, I'm making my own. Now, these tables are actually a significant milestone for this business, as this is the last client job that I'm taking on for the foreseeable future, which is why I think it's fitting to talk about my best and worst client experiences. Now, the reason why I'm stopping client work is to free up some time to focus on video ideas for YouTube and Patreon. But to be honest, I thought this would be a happy and exciting moment, but these recent clients have provided such a great experience that I'm really going to miss the client-maker relationship. Having said that, remembering that nightmare client from 7 years ago, it's safe to say that feeling is fading fast. So I guess I'm purely focusing on videos now. Does that mean I'm officially a YouTuber? Wait, I'm a 40-year-old YouTuber. Gross. Well, I guess that means I have one thing to do. Start selling merch. We got hats, we got limited edition t-shirts, and that's about it. Phew, all this modeling's making me thirsty. Oh, and we got mugs. Shit, that's hot. Everything is now on pre-order. The shirts are limited edition and will no longer be sold after the pre-order. I've personally been working with small businesses in the US to ensure the best quality. After all, I do my best to produce high quality furniture, so my merch shouldn't be any different. And I'm finally going to answer the number one question I get with a response that some of you actually want to hear. Yes, I now sell plans, at least to these side tables anyway. You'll get metric and imperial drawings and cutting lists, plus the SketchUp and Fusion 360 files, door template files, as well as an extended cut 7-part video series that shows more intricate details. And before we continue, I just want to say a big thank you to all of you for watching my videos, for all your kind comments and support. And I just want to promise you that the quality is only going to continue to get better, like my next video. Some of you may already know that I put out a call a while back to find out who everyone's favourite furniture designers were, and after hundreds of responses, I got in touch with the top 10 designers on that long list of names. To my surprise, they all agreed to an hour-long interview to discuss their design theories and processes. My next YouTube video will show the highlights and insights from the interviews of these incredible designers while I implement their design theories into my own piece of furniture. So be sure to subscribe if you want to see that video. And if you're interested in the full designer interview series, I'll be releasing one 60-minute interview per week exclusively on Patreon for the next 10 weeks. There's a link below if you want to find out who's involved. And as always, a special thanks has to go out to all of these fine folks for their support on Patreon. You may be wondering why I've only veneered one side of that MDF panel. After all, veneering one side would make the panel warp and twist, but not to worry, I'll be balancing the other side shortly with one of the key features of this entire cabinet. Now the shape of these doors are clearly staggered. They almost have fingers that intertwine with one another, and that staggered connection is how I'm going to hide the door gap. I did use my laser cutter to create the templates, but the panels can easily be made without it. But this is where the precision of this design begins, as in order for these doors to work, you can only have about a 1mm gap between the fingers. Now, like I said earlier, I made my own veneers, but if you don't have the setup for making your own, then you can simply buy pre-made veneers or buy 9mm or 3/8 veneered plywood or MDF. Have one plywood or MDF layer as the main door panel, then stick these veneered squares to the front of it. After all, this section here is the main feature. It doesn't matter how you do it, just as long as it's not solid wood, as we can't have any movement with this design. These veneered tiles is where the real challenge comes in, as they need to be absolutely perfect in order for these doors to work out. I've decided to alter the grain in different directions to add in some extra feature to the cabinets. My thought process behind this was to take advantage of the fact that I'm using veneer and make the piece look more visually appealing by having the grain run in different directions. Oddly enough, I thought it would probably look more like veneer if I had all the grain going the same way, but either way, I think your eye is distracted by the contrast of this brass bar. And as you can see, I'm working with very specific tolerances. The 3mm MDF strips will not only eventually help to position the veneered tiles, but once I've planed them down, they will allow the brass bar to sit above the tiles, ever so slightly, to add a bit more depth to the doors. Now, it was a struggle to get everything built in time before going overseas, but this wasn't the only thing that I was battling, as I was not going to install this job until I'd received the rest of my deposit plus a progress payment. At least now I had some leverage, and after some stressful conversations back and forth, he finally paid, which gave me confidence moving forward that everything was going to work out in the end. But it wasn't until I got on site that I realised just how bad things were. After weeks of 16-hour days, it was finally install day. Thankfully, because I had to leave for Brazil tomorrow, and I'm not even packed yet. I loaded up my truck with my tools and hired a removalist to help me deliver all the parts for install. I rocked up on site, and that's when the severity of the situation hit me. It was still a construction site. The floors weren't finished, the lights weren't done. I'm supposed to be one of the last trades on site, not the first. This place is not going to open in a few weeks, but in all honesty, I'm more worried about damage to my finished pieces. I know what happens on construction sites. It's easy for things to get dented and dinged up when you have so many trades rushing to meet deadlines. I was seriously concerned, but I had no time. I had to get my job done and not worry about everyone else. I worked into the night, got the cabinets and benches installed, went to load up my truck, and had forgotten that in all the rush, I'd parked in a loading zone. And to top off an already stressful day, I now had a $300 parking fine to deal with. I went home to pack and sent the client the final invoice of $15,000. Clearly concerned about what I'd seen that day, I told him I needed paid tonight. But nothing happened. The next morning, still nothing. I called him on the way to the airport, no answer. I know it sounds naive, and I know I shouldn't have let it get to this point, but I guess it was purely from the momentum of the job that it wasn't until I got on the plane that it hit me. I'm not getting paid, am I? See how the 3mm MDF strips have helped to align the veneered tiles. Although this isn't completely necessary, doing a dry fit with the tiles and adding the 3mm strips does make the final glue up a lot less stressful. I'll then be able to adjust the height of those strips shortly, while also being able to clean up any dry glue squeeze out, as it's imperative that the brass sits perfectly in these grooves. Now, I did my best to enjoy my holiday, although I did check my bank account every day. But I'd accepted the fact that I'd messed up. I'd been careless and let the excitement of an enticing job get the better of my judgment, and at the end of the day, this is a learning experience, although I still wanted my money. After 3 weeks in Brazil, I arrived home a few days before Christmas. I went to the site to see progress and hopefully see my client. As I approached, I could see the doors were closed and the lights were off, with the same plastic covering the windows from weeks ago. I peered through a slight opening in the plastic sheet and yep, still a construction site. I tried calling my client, no answer. As I left, I bumped into one of the plumbers that had been working on this job and surprise, surprise, he hadn't been paid either. It's an unfortunate fact of life that you tend to learn the greatest lessons from misfortune, but this was a defining moment of my career as I learned that not everyone can be trusted and that as a business owner, I need to be more responsible in my processes. I mentioned at the very beginning of this video that there is a way to guarantee the dream client every time. I've had years to refine this and implement it into my work. And I've found that one of the most important factors when dealing with new clients is to set the expectations from the very beginning. But one of the unfortunate truths about being a furniture designer and maker is that people expect a finished design up front before any money has been put down. And this creates a world of problems. How are you going to be taken seriously when you're already working for free? From my experience, I've found that charging for multiple designs up front not only allows you to dedicate the time necessary for a well thought out piece, but also gets rid of those clients that aren't serious as they're not willing to put money down this early in the process. But something strange also happens. Charging up front elevates the perceived value of your service. This is because as consumers, we tend to value what we pay for. And by providing multiple designs up front for the client to choose from, we're allowing them into the creative process, once again providing value to their investment before the piece is even made. This allows you to develop a beautiful relationship with your client, one that creates respect for one another from the very beginning. And since implementing this into my business years ago, I've only had amazing clients. Now, you may be wondering, how on earth do I even do this? Well, first you need a portfolio of your work. This is a must. Your client needs to trust you and know what you're capable of doing before they even contact you. Once they get in touch, explain that you offer a design package that consists of 3 designs based off of their brief with alterations. Once a design is approved, the cost of the design package comes off the total cost of the piece being made. Then you need to provide a questionnaire that answers all the questions needed to begin designing, like what it is, the size, the material, where it's going, and most importantly, the budget. This is necessary as you're now going to design 3 pieces all based on what they're willing to spend. You also need at least 3 inspiration images so you know the style that they're after. Lastly, you're going to send a design package invoice to your client. Work this price out based on what it costs you to create 3 designs with 3 alterations. Once the invoice is paid, you can now get to work on the designs. Now, if you're new to all this, it may sound like a lot, but this is something to work towards if you want to design and make custom furniture. Now, that should be enough information to get started, and I don't mean to sound too promoty here, but if I don't mention it, then no one knows about it. But I do have a Patreon video, linked below, which outlines every step in detail of how to do this, including a guaranteed way to find out your client's budget. This takes practice, but once you master it, it not only builds trust between you and your client from the very beginning, but it stops you from rushing the most important part of the furniture making process, the design. Finally, my client answered his phone, and after a number of excuses as to why he couldn't pay me just yet, I answered in frustration, and I said I would take legal action if I wasn't paid. Now, I'm not proud of this as I didn't want it to get to this point, but the frustration got the better of me. But lo and behold, that night, the remaining amount was paid in full, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could relax. Understandably, this topic may have raised a number of questions to who is really in the wrong here, and let me just clarify. This is my fault for allowing myself to get into this position. I take full responsibility for my inexperience at the time, and at the end of the day, I don't think this client was a bad guy, and I don't think it was his intention to not pay people. I think he just bit off more than he could chew. He had big dreams, but they were built on promises he couldn't keep, and in the end, the restaurant never opened, and those promises were never fulfilled. At the end of the day, I got my money, but there's one thing that really bothers me: the promise of professional photos. Because I was expecting these photos, I never took photos of my own, so I have absolutely no documentation of these cabinets. I still often wonder, where are they? We all have an emotional tie to the pieces we make, so I'm sure this is something I'll always think about, especially because those cabinets allowed me to excel as a maker and try new things. But I guess what's a good story without a little mystery, right? Realistically, this job was the perfect storm right from the very beginning. During a time of financial desperation and creative uncertainty, a bunch of empty promises is all I needed to continue turning a blind eye to what was most likely obvious to everyone else. But hey, we're nothing if we can't learn from our mistakes, and this was a big one on my part. But if that experience didn't happen, then I may have never ended up here, building this project for yet another amazing client.